Hey guys, my name is Callum and this is my brother Kieran and my friend Matt, and we are Tempest Calm, and we just want to welcome you and thank you for coming and checking out this conversation series. So if you haven't seen it so far, basically what we've decided to do is, as we unpack each track from our album, we record a little video and we make a document, I guess, which sort of shares the story behind it, the themes behind it, and the way that we wrote each song. So today we're going to be sharing about track 3, which is Dawn. Before I get into it though, the whole reason that we wanted to do this is because when we were working through quite a difficult experience in our lives, Key and I found that we felt really alone in it. And it struck us that our hope was that maybe, just maybe, we could connect with you or others and just remind you that if you're in a journey yourself where you're doing it tough and you're feeling alone, we just want to let you know that you're not. And you can connect with us at tempestcalm.com. We would love to hear your story, and we'd love to just get alongside you and encourage you if we can, because life is about doing community together, and life is about being together when things are tough. And the reality is that sometimes life is tough. So yeah, that's the reason why we're doing this, and we're just grateful you're here. So Dawn, track 3.
Yeah, so track 3, Dawn, on the record was actually, thinking about it, it's actually the first song we wrote for the project. But when we wrote it way back in 2017, we didn't realise that we had a project coming.
Yeah.
So we wrote the song Dawn back in 2017, and then we released it for a short period. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't until we started writing the Shadowlands project 2021 that we realised Dawn was actually going to be quite a pivotal piece in that project. So from that point there, we had it remastered and re-released into the project now. So for us, I also found that for me personally, it was probably a bit of a writing change and a writing season change for our group.
Yeah,
we did things in Dawn that maybe we hadn't done in the earlier EP as specific. So I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about that. And probably a good starting point is like the writing process.
Yep.
Maybe start with you actually, bro.
Yeah.
How did the song start?
It's funny trying to remember because it's like 2017. It's a long time ago now, and we're calling it a new song. But you're right, it was out beforehand. It started as a folk song, which is funny now because like it's got this like electronic kind of pop vibe with like a heap of moog in it, which I love. But it's kind of started like with this really weird like acoustic. Dawn, would you slide over, tell me something else?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And then obviously it turned into this like really electronic kind of like driven moog pop sound, which was super different to the original. But I love how it turned out, right?
Yeah, but I think also when you first started playing the guitar, I remember jamming this in the den, where we'd jam at your house.
Yeah.
And Callum would bring in that acoustic guitar, but what triggered the song in the next direction was actually your drums, because you came in with that beat, and that kind of set up the next part of the song.
Yeah, it kind of left us wanting to take it in a different direction.
Yeah.
It just wasn't going to work with the folk vibe. So,
yeah. What's your like inspiration, or what was your ideas behind the drums for that track?
it's probably very influenced by electronic influences. I was really getting into, like, in around 2015, really digging certain Porter Robinson and certain electronic artists. And as a drummer, it's not what you'd usually be doing into, because they're kind of like the enemy, like they're taking the drums away from you. But for me, I don't know, I just started digging it, and I love the especially the synths and stuff involved.
Yeah.
And so I suppose that was an influence, and I was all about kind of Moogs and anything electro bass. So and I had a friend, Dan Chan, a friend of all of ours. Who had this Moog, like an analog electro bass, like the real deal. I was like, I've got to find a way to get this on one of our tracks. But I was like, as in this sound like the track that it could work, as weird as it would be coming from a folk song.
Yeah.
And I suppose the rest is history in that sense. With
I mean, you were a big advocate for the Moog.
Oh yeah.
But I'm glad we did it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what made this track so different. I mean, I think back to 2017, and like all of the Pacific EP was like very little electronic, little to no, well, there wasn't any Moog. And so that was the first thing coming out of that, and it felt so different, and that was exciting. So I'm glad you brought that along.
But the undertones as well of the Moog, of the electric bass, all this kind of stuff. That's why it fit the project so well. Into the Shadowlands project when we start talking about chaos and confusion and the tones we're trying to write with. And that's probably why when we wrote Dawn back in 2017, it was quite a bit ahead of what we were doing as a group back that stage sonically. And we've got to give props to Dave Chidsey as well. I mean, he
played it like a boss.
Yeah, we dropped the bass and he played the Moog and absolutely destroyed it. And that really set up the rest of the record. Even for me, like from a tonality point of view and a structural point of view, I found myself really growing from those influences, which was probably influencing from what you brought with the Moog and what Chidsey played. It's the first time I started getting into MIDI and looking for different kind of sounds, and then fast forward a few years and the whole record's now starting to sound pretty much heavily influenced by that stuff. So
do you remember bringing it into the studio and just going, okay, we've got it here now,
how do we use it?
How do we use it? How do we not make it sound like it's a system malfunctioning, like some kind of weird sound? So there was a lot of playing with it to get like, oh, it sounds a bit like a nice electro bass, and then Chidsey and Chad and yourself like just tweaking it.
And I think, you became an advocate for it. We called you Matty Moog for the rest of the record.
That was very annoying.
Any chance you had, you'd be putting the Moog on one of our tracks, but I think for us, Dawn was actually quite a pillar sonically for what the rest of the record could become. It was a really good launching pad for us to build from.
I always remember your hooks with the keyboard. I think that bridge, that was really cool. I think that's
writing melodies.
I think that sort of made it what it was.
I mean, when we talk about like lyrics, right? Maybe talk through verse 1.
Yeah.
And like, what themes were you thinking about? What was going on when you were writing it?
Yeah. Dawn is a song about finding hope and perspective, but the thing is, it was written at a time when I didn't have either of those things, or at least healthy versions of those things. So, the first verse, Dawn, would you slide over, tell me something else, something more than a feeling. Break down the walls I build around myself, pick up the pieces. I'm wide awake, my thoughts are troubling. I don't know if time is on my side. I'm discontent with all this struggling, I don't want to hide away. It was, that verse 1 is basically reflective of how I felt at the time. I was really struggling with anxiety, and I had just a series of just sleepless nights. And it was actually a really long period where I just couldn't sleep, and I wasn't feeling well. And so Dawn was birthed out of that place where I didn't want to hide away, and literally I'd go to bed, and there was this dreaded moment where I was like, oh, I actually don't want to get caught with my own thoughts. And nighttime's a perfect place for that, because when everything gets quiet and slows down, and I remember my wife sleeping next to me and me just lying awake with my thoughts and getting trapped in my head, and I dreaded it. And I used to just pray for dawn, like literally just be like, oh man, this time cannot pass quick enough. And so that's why I wrote Dawn. So that was verse 1, right?
Jumping back into verse 1, like break down the walls I built around myself. Like, it is a bit of a personal question, but I'm guessing this was written pretty much right through the time where we were going through the battle with church and everything that was going on back in 2016-17 time frame. Like, what were the walls? Were you referring to what you were going through at that stage? Were you referring to stuff that, throughout your life? Like, what were the walls you built up?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of it had to do with identity. Yeah. Like, I'd created this persona, at least in my head, of who I was, and I felt very sure that I was this person. I was seen in this light, and I behaved a certain way because that's who I was. I was acting out of that place, and then when that fell, and when the walls came crumbling down, I felt like exposed.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably where that line sort of is drawn from.
It certainly ties back to identity. I think on the other frame as well is like, I know for myself that the walls I put up was the isolation. It was like after we went through it.
Yeah.
Like, we quickly built walls to protect ourselves so we wouldn't
that's a
through
great
it
point.
again. So
yeah,
there's probably two sides
yeah.
to look at it. That's how it always spoke to me.
Yeah, that's cool. Let's take your answer. No, it's good. And I like that though. Like, you can interpret it how it applies. Yeah.
What about verse 2?
Yeah. Verse 2. Verse 2 was birthed out of I had a particular night, right? That was quite a significant moment in my life. And coming from the same place, I was lying there next to Carrie and listening to her sleep and not being able to turn off myself. And it was a really difficult time where I just I wasn't healthy. And I remember going out into my lounge room and picking up my guitar and so I just sat down, and it was dark. I remember it being dark, and like we had this like kind of like broken street lamp out the front, and so there was like dim light sort of just coming through the curtain, enough for me to sort of like see and find my bearings. And I remember probably for the first time in my life, I didn't know what I was doing, but in hindsight I realised I was looking back and I was allowing myself just to lament. And I remember just being like super angry at God and all that stuff that had happened with like the failure of church and like loss of friends and family and all that stuff, just taking it to him and just saying like, why? And the lyrics aren't in this song, and there was I remember I can't remember a lot of what I was singing, but I remember this sort of like 4-part line where I sang to God, like, maybe you left the church when we built up our walls. Maybe you left our buildings and our altar calls. Maybe you're in the dark, in the deepest of holes. Maybe we'll find God when we lose ourselves. And I remember singing that and then just like sitting quietly and processing it. And then, I mean, it was such a surreal experience, but like, it sounds really mystic and stuff, but it didn't feel like that. It was just this audible voice, just like said, Callum, I could never leave the church. I came for the church. And it was such a like landmark moment in my life, and particularly in this story. And I think that arcs back to why, for me, I felt like Dawn had to be a part of the Shadowlands story, because it's built off that moment where verse 2 says, Dawn, but there's got this line, between the chaos and the certainty is where perspective is refined. And that was birthed out of that experience. And I think it's worth saying as well, like in that moment, I didn't feel like suddenly everything was better. Like I didn't feel like, like, yes, life's going to be good now because I've heard from God. But what it did do was really shaped my perspective moving forward. And it put me on the right sort of like mental path where I was able to look beyond myself and look beyond the hurt and the bitterness and find some perspective in it.
That's so good. And I mean, coming out of Bronzewing, which is track 2, and we finish it, like we said in our last conversation, where you finish it the same way you started and you're kind of confused and bitter and you have no questions answered. Dawn is a natural progression because we're seeking for some hope. You know, like, because you get to the end of Bronzewing and you go, I don't actually know if there's hope. I think there is. And then Dawn is that new, like, there's hope tomorrow. So you're hoping in something that will come. I've been riffing on the idea, and it's a common one where you talk about, like, in the Shadowlands project, like, darkness is conquered by light. And I love the idea of a shadow. For a shadow to be there, it means there has to be light.
Totally.
You know? There might be something in the way obstructing what's happening, casting a shadow, but the truth of the matter is there's light. Like for us, we know that it's Jesus, right? Like he is the light, and we will talk more about that as we go through the resolution process of this project. But it is important to also recognise that people sit in that space of anxiety and depression, and like some of these terms, like they're heavy, and we don't have the, we don't have the answers necessarily, but just to say that like we're with you. You know, and what you said from the beginning, like you're not alone. And what I really found in this whole, couple of year process was community is so important.
Absolutely.
And talking back to what we talked about, where you build walls to isolate yourself, it just gets harder and harder. When you isolate yourself on your walls and you start yelling out, the only thing that bounces back is straight off the walls, and all you feel is like you're alone and there's no one around. But it's almost like we want to like say it today, just to say it, that there are people that care for you, hey? And
absolutely.
Like I want to thank you boys for like being there for me through that time as well. And I think it's not enough said about how important community is in people's lives.
I think as well, just to like look at that between the chaos and the certainty in that moment where I felt like, what is chaos and what is certainty? Well, chaos is everything around us that is noise and that is darkness and a distraction. And it doesn't matter what your circumstance is, that can be deemed as your chaos. So what is certainty? For me, in that moment where God spoke to me, I realized in that moment that God was my certainty. And every other bit of noise around me was going to be that. It was going to be chaos. But between that and certainty, I would be able to find my way, and God was going to be that certainty all the way through. That was what put me instead for the next chapter. And we talk about the next chapter being waiting, and like sort of waiting in that, where you're like, you can recognize it, right? You recognize the shift and the perspective change, but then you go like, oh, how do I wait in that? How do I wait in like something that hasn't broken through yet? And that's what the next song is. Not there yet. Well, guys, we're so grateful that you've joined us for this chat. And the cool thing is we've actually got two before this. So if you're joining us in this part of the story, you can head back, check out our video for Shadowlands and for Bronze Wings. And we're stoked that Matt's come in for this chat, and looking forward to having him for more of them, where you can sort of hear your insights, bro. It's really good. Again, if you are joining us on this journey, we're really grateful you're here, and we want to remind you you're not alone, and you can connect with us at tempestcalm.com. We would love to hear from you. And we're grateful you're here. See you soon.